edge of the unknown, where the world forgets, but the shadows never do. Picture crumbling factories, their iron bones rusting in silence. Imagine schools frozen in time, desks waiting for students who'll never return. Envision decaying houses, whispering secrets to empty halls. Lighthouses standing alone against endless storms, and tunnels so dark they swallow light itself. These are the abandoned places, haunted corners of our world where the past doesn't just linger, it hunts. Tonight, I'm pulling back the veil on 5 bone-chilling true stories of urban explorers who dared to cross the threshold and paid a price they'll never forget. Every creak, every flicker, every heartbeat in the silence. It's not just a warning. It's a promise of something watching, waiting for you. So, kill the lights, lock the door, and come with me. Let's step into the darkness together and uncover the horrors that thrive where no one else dares to tread. Before we begin, where are you listening from? Tell me in the comments. I'm an urban explorer, and I'll never forget what I found in an abandoned factory. My name is Wyatt. I am 21 now, but this story happened last winter when I was still 20. I'm an urban explorer and nature photographer. That is about as much detail I'll go into about myself, because I don't want anybody coming after me if they find out what I've seen. I know I will never forget what I saw, but I can't risk telling anyone that I know. I am not currently under any immediate danger, but there are too many unknowns. Back in early December of last year, I was looking through Instagram and saw some shots from an abandoned factory in Germany. This place was so perfect. It was rusting and old, but still kept the same structure and shape as when it was in use. Some of the pictures were breathtaking. Mountain views through decrepit old windows, things like that. I screenshotted and reverse image searched one of the pictures from Instagram and found a place in Germany. There was no name for the factory anywhere I looked, but I kept seeing that the town it was in was called Westchen. I looked it up on Google Earth and saw that it was in a mountainous region in northern Germany. As I swiped through the images on Google, one article stopped me. It claimed that the factory was going to be demolished in April of next year, meaning it would be gone in just a few months. I was feeling impulsive and excited, so without thinking I Googled flights to Berlin. Looking back, I wish my phone would have died at that very moment. Anything to stop me from looking at flights. I would do anything to go back and make me close that tab. However, I found one flight leaving from my airport that Wednesday. It was only $600. I was just about to buy the tickets when I remembered that my friend Bryce, not his real name, was looking for somewhere to go for winter break. So I called him up and told him that there were tickets to Berlin for $600. I wish he would have talked me out of it, but instead, he was all over the idea. Later that afternoon, we both bought our tickets and planned to leave on Wednesday. Adrian, also not his real name, was also coming with us, but was going to leave early on Saturday to go see his family in Poland. Me and Bryce made plans to go to Westchen on Sunday and look around there for a few hours. So when Wednesday came, I packed up all my stuff: camera lenses, SD cards, respirator, flashlights, clothes, and met up with Bryce and Adrian. We took an Uber to the airport and quickly boarded the plane. Honestly, I don't remember most of the flight. I think I slept through most of it. But finally, we arrived in Berlin. Honestly, for the next few days, it was just a normal vacation. Nothing but sightseeing and doing basic tourist things. On Saturday, we said our goodbyes to Adrian, and he left for Poland. That night, I made sure to get all my stuff ready for the next morning. We had a 2-hour car ride from Berlin to Westchen. I was hoping we would get there around 2 in the afternoon and explore until about 8 that night. Playing it back in my head, I remember every little detail of that day. I remember the sound of my alarm, the excitement of waking up that day, the feeling of seeing all my stuff packed neatly on the floor next to my bed. We got up and had breakfast in the hotel lobby before walking to the car rental place. We picked out a blue Chevy from the lot, and the guy gave us the keys. I spent the next few hours driving through the green rolling hills of Germany until we finally got there. I felt nothing but excitement when we finally got into the town. I remember just driving and looking around for a while until we saw it there, clear as day. The abandoned factory. It sat at the bottom of a tall hill in the middle of a bright green field. The mountains were in the distance to the east opposite the factory. I started looking on Google Maps for a good place to park in order for us to walk there. There was a large parking lot next to a self-storage place that was only about a quarter mile from the factory. I pulled into one of the spots and looked around for people. Should be good, I told Bryce as we got out of the car. I grabbed my camera bag, my flashlight, and my respirator out of the back seat and put it all on. For those of you who don't know, a lot of old buildings were built with toxic materials like asbestos, so it's just safer to not even risk it and wear the respirator. We began walking down this old cracked asphalt road that has grass and flowers growing through it. It led straight to the factory, which I remember finally having a good view of. It was brown and rusted, but still beautiful and majestic. It had plants growing in it like it had been retaken by nature after the people left it. After a little walking, we reached a tall chain-link fence that was locked. But there was no barbed wire on top, so I considered just jumping it. But instead I decided to look for an easier way. After walking next to the fence, I saw part of it had been knocked from the metal frame by somebody else. We pushed the metal out of the way and just crawled through it onto the other side. Now, we just had to get into the factory. It was already clear to me that the main entrance wasn't an option. It probably had motion sensors anyway. I was looking around when I spotted it. A broken window. It was only about 10 feet off the ground, so I asked Bryce to help me up. He hoisted me up and I grabbed onto the windowsill. I pulled myself up and through the window frame, pushing aside the broken glass as I did so. I pulled Bryce up through the window, and we both jumped down on the ground inside the factory. Now when I say this thing was massive, I mean massive, like probably the biggest single room I have ever seen. It had so many levels and catwalks and bridges. This place was a gold mine. I immediately got out my camera and put on my 1635 lens and my best flash. I also put in a new SD card just in case. We walked around the ground floor a bit, mostly just looking up at the ceiling. I took one picture of all the catwalks and bridges leading up to a crack in the ceiling letting sunlight through. We went up one of the staircases onto the second level. There were a ton of generators and turbines all over the place, with a thick layer of dust and rubble covering them. I took some pictures on this floor, but we quickly moved up to the next floor. It was more of the same stuff, but still beautiful. I walked to the edge of the floor and looked over the small balcony-like platform we were on. I immediately felt dizzy looking all the way down to the ground level. I'm used to that kind of stuff. I just didn't realize how high up we were. We climbed up the stairs to the next floor when Bryce told me to look at the mountains out the window. That was the shot from Instagram that I wanted. I adjusted my settings and snapped the shot. I checked over them just to make sure it was good because that's pretty much the reason I came here. Even though I'm explaining this all very quickly, we did spend hours wandering around this place and looking at every little detail. We eventually got to some sort of control room. It must have had hundreds of different switches and buttons, all labeled with German words that I couldn't read, or seemingly random numbers. It was made clear from a thick layer of dust that this stuff hadn't been used in decades probably. That being said, I know I shouldn't have done this, but I took a small silver key from the control room as a souvenir. We left the control room and saw a ladder that went up at least 2 stories. It led straight up onto the roof of the factory. I hesitantly decided to climb it. Bryce said he'd do it if I did it first. The ladder wobbled from side to side as I hesitantly climbed up the steel bars. Finally, I grabbed onto the roof and pulled myself up onto it. "You'll be fine if you go slow," I yelled down at him. Soon he joined me up on the roof, and we looked out on the rest of the world. It was just endless rolling green hills leading to the snow-capped mountains. I turned around and looked behind us. I realized that the hill behind us was taller than the factory itself. If we could get to that hill before sunset, the picture would be unbelievable. I really wish I had just abandoned the idea. But instead, we rushed back down the ladder and all the staircases to the ground level. We quickly leapt out the window and crawled through the fence. We walked across the grassy green fields and slowly walked up that tall green hill. I won't lie, it was tiring walking all the way up that hill, racing the sunset. When we finally got there, it was totally worth it. The factory, the mountains, and the sunset all mashed together in this beautiful vista. I took out my tripod and lined up the composition. When I finally snapped the shot, I took 9 or 10 of the exact same picture, just to make sure I got it. It was incredible, but if I could, I would go back in time and leave that hill immediately. But unfortunately, Bryce looked behind us and pointed out another abandoned building to me. It was smaller, made of brick rather than steel. He was hesitant to go down there and check it out because it was getting late. I assured him we would be fine with the flashlights, and we wouldn't be long. We walked back down the other side of the hill and over to the dilapidated brick building. By the time we got there, it was getting pretty dark already, but we had flashlights that worked fine. The only weird thing was that when we walked up to it, the gate was unlocked, like they weren't even trying to keep people out. I guess it was pretty hard to find, but still. We walked straight through the gate. I was scanning the area for motion sensors or alarms, but there was nothing. The same exact thing when we got to the front door. No lock, no bar, nothing. We moved open the metal door, but it was heavy. Hard for either of us to even move. We entered the building, and it was dark. Super dark. I immediately had to turn on my flashlight to even be able to see. The building looked more of the same. Catwalks, machines, and the overall same vibe. But there was a large circular door directly in front of us. It looked more like the entrance to a bank vault than any normal door you would find. At this point, I was stunned that we hadn't seen a single alarm or motion sensor in this place. We were both immediately drawn to the vault door. I put my hand on it in awe. I had never seen anything like this in all the places I've explored. It was barely cracked open, not open all the way, but definitely not closed. I put my hand in between the door and the wall and tried to pry it open. It slowly moved open, showing us what was inside. There was a long, circular tunnel that just led to another room. So far, this was looking like one of the best finds for me ever. I took multiple pictures looking down that long hallway, the flash lighting up the area. We slowly walked down the hallway, flashlights in hand as we advanced towards the room at the end. When we got to the end of the hallway, there was another vault door that was swung all the way open. We walked through the open door into the room. It was seemingly empty, except for a small hatch leading into the ground. It was closed, but the lock and chain on it were broken. Above it, there was an arrow pointing at the hatch that said, Project Nachtwolfin. At the time, I had no idea what it meant. I didn't even take a second to put it into Google Translate. Nowadays, the words still send a chill down my spine. Project Night Wolf. A phrase that sounds like nothing. But if you had seen what I've seen, you wouldn't be able to hear those words without shuddering. I slowly opened the hatch, the hinges squeaking as I did so. I flipped it all the way over until it was on the other floor. I shined my flashlight down the hatch to reveal what looked like just a normal staircase. We began slowly descending down the stairs. As we got closer to the bottom, you could hear the drops of water hitting the floor and making a quiet sound. I was going first, ahead of Bryce, so I saw it first. A room that was all pitch black, with about 2 inches of water lining the whole floor, came into my sight. What horrified me were the piles of animal skeletons and bones lying in the water. Small rodents that had been mutilated, and sheep that had been torn apart. Some were just the skeletons, but others still had decaying, rotting flesh, but it looked like they had been ripped apart, some of them torn perfectly in two. I struggled to hold back my vomit as the smell hit me. I was firing off my camera flash, taking pictures all around us when I spotted another door just ahead of us. I remember Bryce telling me we should just leave. But I wanted to get to that last door. The room was made out of cement. Stone pillars sat around the room, although some of them looked like they were about to collapse. We finally got to the door. I opened it. It looked like just another control room, like the ones in the factory. The thing that was different, though, was there were swastikas on a lot of the equipment and walls. Not ones that had spray painted on by some kids, but real-looking ones. It was as if this place hadn't been touched since World War II. I'd looked around at some of the buttons and stuff until I saw a journal. I opened it to find that, unsurprisingly, it was in German, but I stuffed it in my pocket to take home. Just then, I heard the sound of broken glass. Not like somebody dropping a wine glass, but like an entire window was just shattered all at once. I immediately turned off my flashlight, and Bryce slammed the door behind us. We both knelt down, breathing as silently as possible, not wanting to know what that sound was. Thoughts rushed through my head, possibly a bird, a mountain lion, but neither of those were even possible. We sat in that room for about a full minute until I realized that it was probably just because of how old this room was. Some structural error or rotting metal probably caused it. I worked up enough courage to go out there. Bryce said that he would go if I opened the door first. I walked over to the door, still crouched on the ground, and I turned the handle. I slowly creaked the door open, and as if we were in a horror movie, my flashlight died. I was too committed at this point to go back, so I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed my camera and started blindly firing off the flash. It could only do it about every 3 seconds, but I slowly creeped further and further and further out into the room. And that's when I saw it. It looked like a shadow crouched on the ground. But about 10 feet away from me was this oily black, skeleton-like creature. It slowly stood up, making cracking and crunching sounds as it did so. Its limbs snapped back and forth like they were breaking. When it finally got all the way up, I saw its mangled set of razor-sharp teeth lining a huge gash in its face. It was at least 9 feet tall, with its head almost hitting the ceiling. It was holding the body of a fox in its lanky, disguising arms. It ripped the fox in two as it let out a horrifying, ear-piercing screech. My flash stopped firing. I looked down at my camera to see the message, SD card full. I quickly grabbed the one in my pocket and switched them out. But when I fired the flash again, the creature was gone. Had I just imagined it? I felt paralyzed when suddenly it grabbed me by the neck. Its hand felt wet and sharp as it pulled me towards it. Bryce immediately ran for the door, and I don't blame him for it. I was panicked. No rational thoughts ran through my brain except one: survive. As I was brought closer to its face, I grabbed the pocket knife from my right pocket and plunged it deep into the neck of the creature. It dropped me and let out a horrifying scream. My camera smashed on the floor, and I felt Bryce grab my arm to pull me up. We bolted for the door and slammed it behind us. We could still hear it screaming and screeching as we ran up the stairs. When we got up the stairs and above the hatch in the floor, I tied the chain around the lock, hoping to give us more time. After that, we just sprinted back to our car. It was pitch black by that point, so when we got in the car, we sped off and didn't look back for a second. It was a very silent car ride back to the airport. We got on an earlier flight back home and left that night. We didn't talk about what happened until we got back home. I didn't leave my room for the rest of that winter break. If it weren't for the journal and the pictures, I would have thought that I dreamt it. But no, the pictures showed the disgusting creature exactly how I remember it. I'm actually glad I switched out SD cards, or I would have no pictures of it. I won't post any of them here, mainly because I don't want people finding this place and making the same mistake I did. But I will post a section from the journal that I was able to translate. Most of the journal is illegible, but I could make out this small section. Our tests have not been getting better. It has become even more violent, no longer eating the rabbits, but just tearing them apart. Nobody here wants to get into the cage with it anymore, because of the fact that it seems to find joy in destroying the animals. Also the screaming. I will not forget the screaming until the day I die. March 24th, 1942. My friends and I explored an abandoned school. I wish we hadn't. I got into urbex at an early age, middle school to be exact. This was long before it became popular on YouTube or TikTok. I was never outgoing, academically advanced, or particularly good at sports. Neither me nor any of my friends had much extra money to throw towards spending afternoons at the mall or arcade. My first experience with urbex started when some friends and I had a sleepover at Caitlin's Dodge. Caitlin lived in a trailer in a rural village. A lot of the houses nearby were large and expensive. Not quite mansions, but pretty close. We were eating popcorn and watching a movie when Caitlin mentioned an abandoned home behind her house. She explained that the couple who lived there had a nasty divorce, and the house was up for sale as a result. Caitlin had never seen the inside of the house, but her mom had mentioned it being really nice. I had had an idea to liven up our night. "Why don't we go see it?" I asked. They all looked at me like I was crazy. "We snuck out before. Why not just go over? Take a look, then come right back?" Caitlin shrugged. "I don't see why not," she said. Caitlin distracted the family dog with a treat while the rest of us crept out the back door. It took less than 5 minutes to reach the house. We tried unsuccessfully to pick the lock, but luckily Jesse found an unlocked window. The interior of the house was magnificent. The floors were all marble, and there was an extravagant fireplace in the living room. We began to look around. Each room seemed more luxurious than the last. One of the more notable spaces was a hot tub, oddly placed at the landing of the stairs in the front room. After an hour or so of exploring, we headed back to Caitlin's. Luckily, we got back in without waking her parents. Since that night, urbex has been my passion. Caitlin and I explored many abandoned places together. Our selection of locations to explore expanded over the years as our curfew got later and we got our licenses. Although Caitlin was adventurous, there was still one destination she avoided. Oak River School was one of the most insidious, yet least known scandals in my hometown. It seemed to be a typical high school. It boasted average academic scores and a great football team. But below the surface, something wasn't right. A record number of graduates from Oak River were diagnosed with cancer, particularly leukemia. Some were diagnosed only a few years after graduation, and others not until decades later. The school was abruptly closed, and students were sent to temporary sites to continue classes, while a new school was quickly rebuilt several miles away from the old one. Eventually, the truth came out. The soil Oak River High was built on was used as a dumping ground for nuclear waste in the 1940s. The cancer rates weren't a coincidence. The old Oak River was never torn down. My aunt, Cora, was one of the many unfortunate alumni who developed leukemia. She passed away when I was 17. She was the stereotypical cool aunt who let me watch R-rated movies and served me Pepsi in a wine glass whenever I visited. More than that, Cora was the only one in my family I could truly be myself around. From holding me as I cried when I wrecked my bike at 6 years old to helping me through my first breakup at 15, I could always count on her. Losing Cora was the worst experience of my life. I'd always wanted to explore Oak River, but for some reason, her death made me fixate on it even more. I had to see what it looked like. The radioactive school frozen in time. I felt like if I walked through the same hallways or stepped into the classroom where Cora had been so many years before she would be there with me. Of course, I was smart enough to realize this was just a morbid fascination from grief, and that nothing would change once I left. But I still couldn't let go of the thought of going to Oak River. Come on. Jess agreed to go, and she's bringing all her photography equipment. I begged Caitlin during our phone call. No, she responded. You know that's the one place I won't go. I accepted her answer and called Jess to let her know we would be going without Caitlin. We met at the back entrance of Oak River At 8 that night, the school wasn't as hard to break into as I expected, and we quickly found ourselves in the hallway. Some old trophies and medals were still on display behind the dusty glass. Why didn't they take those? I wondered out loud. They're probably all covered in radioactive dust. Jess laughed. Ron, Jess's boyfriend, met us shortly after we found our way in. He's into paranormal investigation and wanted to try out some of his equipment as the school was rumored to be haunted. They proceeded to the gym and were messing with the EMF sensor for a while, so I decided to look around on my own. The first few classrooms I looked at weren't as bare as I expected. They still had posters on the wall and other equipment out. I found a globe and spun it, instantly regretting my decision as dust flowed into the air. Luckily, we had worn masks and gloves to try to limit our exposure as much as possible. I heard a rustling noise. I turned around to see where it was coming from. Next to the boarded-up window, I noticed a mostly wilted, potted plant. But the plant wasn't dead. It was moving. Very subtle movements. I had to do a double take to be sure of what I saw. "What the hell?" I whispered. The only way I can describe the movement is almost a sort of twitching. I got out my phone to record and picked up a ruler to poke it. The plant coiled around the ruler tightly, almost yanking out of my hand. I yelled and jumped back. Jess and Ron came running. I tried to explain what happened, but they didn't seem convinced. Ron found a pointer by the chalkboard and poked the plant again. It didn't move. I stammered, trying to explain what happened. Jess and Ron exchanged glances. "Maybe you shouldn't be walking around here alone," suggested Jess. Ron nodded. "Let's all just stay together," he suggested. I reluctantly agreed. We took a look in a few other classrooms. Jess photographed each as we went along. Eventually, we made our way into the cafeteria. We found some old trays, glasses, and even unopened cans of food. As we ventured further into the kitchen, Ron halted, almost causing Jess to run into him. "Why'd you do that?" she snapped. "Shh. Listen," whispered Ron. Through the silence, I could hear a faint chewing noise. It continued for a few minutes. Then came the clang of a can hitting the ground. A light rustling followed. We stood there, frozen. Ron involuntarily coughed. A figure emerged from the darkness. Jess turned the flashlight to it. It definitely wasn't an animal, but it also couldn't be human. It stood on two legs, was almost 7 feet tall, emaciated, with yellow-tinged skin speckled with red boils that looked like they were about to pop. The figure let out a groan that sounded equal parts terrified and angry. Jess screamed, dropping her flashlight. Ron and Jess took off in one direction while I ran in another. I ducked into a janitor's closet. I tried to quiet my breathing as much as possible, even taking off my mask, trying to catch my breath. I sat against the wall, head in my hands, trying to stave off a panic attack. I looked around the closet a bit, seeing if there was anything I could use for self-defense. All I found was an old broom. I stayed quiet for a while, then hesitantly stepped out of the closet when I was convinced the creature was nowhere close. I began looking for Jess and Ron. I tried calling Jess, but my phone had no service. I heard labored breathing and trudging down the hallway. Damn it, I thought. I noticed a door on my left. It was glass, but was fogged to the point where I couldn't see through it. The hallway was a dead end, and I could hear the figure getting closer. I opened the glass door and stepped into the room. The air was thick and humid. I struggled to keep from coughing. I put the broom through the door handles to barricade myself in. I hoped the figure would pass me by, but then I heard a pounding at the door. I wasn't sure how much force it would take to break the old glass, and I had no interest in finding out. I panned the room with my flashlight, looking for another way out. My flashlight passed over a dark, reflective abyss. This was the old pool. The walls were covered in a mixture of black and green molds. I remembered Cora had mentioned being on the swim team years before. There was a door on the other side of the room. I began making my way to the other side, but quickly realized my way was blocked by some overturned bleachers. I tried lifting them up, but it was no use. "Harper!" Jesse yelled from the door on the other side of the room. Noticing the predicament I was in, Jesse and Ron attempted to move the bleachers but weren't able to either. At this point, the glass door was splintering from the humanoid monster pounding on it. "You know how to swim, right?" asked Ron. I nodded. "Are you crazy?" screamed Jesse. "She can't swim through that radioactive bullshit." I'd already accepted my fate of having to wade through this disgusting abandoned pool and tried to reassure her I'd be fine. I found a piece of wood to set my backpack on, trying to keep it as dry as possible. I stepped into the cold, dark water. The water felt thicker than I expected. It was like moving through jello. The smell was a repulsive combination of decay and metallic. I swam as fast as possible. I'd almost reached the edge when the water began rippling. My right leg stopped moving. It was caught on something. Jesse and Ron noticed my struggle. Ron jumped into the water and tried to pull me forward. He shined a flashlight through the dark waters, revealing a labyrinth of dark green limbs. "What the hell?" Ron whispered. The water began to move rapidly. I felt the slimy substance tighten around my leg and screamed. Ron began thrashing around, cursing and yelling. I frantically grabbed for my backpack, retrieving my pocket knife out of the front pocket. I took a deep breath, went underwater and hacked at the slimy substance trapping my leg. It began to twitch as the grip loosened, and I got myself free. Jesse was pulling Ron out of the water on the other side, crying frantically. Something most people don't know about Jessie was that she had an extreme fear of water and couldn't swim. A near-drowning experience when she was 4 had left her traumatized. I pulled myself up to the surface and we all ran out the door. Ron was limping. He had a nasty gash on his left calf. Once we got some distance from the pool, we stopped, and Jessie tied her jacket around it to slow the bleeding. Jessie's phone rang, startling us. "Caitlin," she answered, placing it on speaker. A grainy FaceTime call lit up the screen. The background was dark, but looked familiar. Caitlin was in the classroom closest to the entrance. "Caitlin, listen to me. You need to leave. There's some weird shit happening here," Jessie tried to explain. The connection wasn't good. The call cut out every few seconds, making it difficult to understand. Jessie, Ron, and I all tried to explain what was going on, but Caitlin clearly didn't understand. The connection continued to get worse the further into the school Caitlin got. Eventually the call dropped completely, and none of us were able to dial back out. "Jessie, you and Ron get out and go find some help. I'll find Caitlin and meet you guys on the other side." Ron tried to protest. Luckily, Jessie was able to convince him that the bleeding was too serious to continue. As we parted ways, Jessie and I agreed that if Caitlin and I weren't safely out in 15 minutes, she would call for help. "Caitlin," I called out as I reached the front of the building. "Help!" I heard her yell frantically. I ran towards the sound and saw her. We sprinted towards each other, but she tripped over something in the process. A figure donning an archaic gas mask emerged behind her, grabbing her ankles and dragging her away. "No!" I yelled. I tried to run towards the assailant, but someone grabbed me from behind. As I tried to fight my way out, I flailed, slamming my head into the wall. I felt dizzy, and everything went dark. I saw a light. I knew what people always said about going into the light. Was this death? "She's awake," I heard. A paramedic was kneeling over me. I jumped. As I regained consciousness, I started stammering. "What's going on? Where's Caitlin?" The EMT tried to calm me. My mom and Jesse were nearby. My head hurt a lot, and my arms and legs were bruised. I was transported to the hospital. That night, the only answer I could get as far as Caitlin's whereabouts was that they were looking for her. The next day, I was informed by police that Caitlin's body was found in the school. The stairs had collapsed, crushing her. I tried to tell police about the man in the gas mask, but they clearly didn't believe me. They pretty much nodded, then had a social worker follow up with me with information on trauma counseling. What bothers me the most is I'm not even sure Jess and Ron believe me. Something sinister is still happening in that school. I'm going back. River Oak won't take anyone else from me. I clean abandoned houses, and this house is still haunting me today. Just as the title states, I clean abandoned houses for a living. I'm quite proud of myself as I have worked hard starting my own business at just 24 years old and building it to what it is now. I specifically targeted these types of cleaning jobs, as you can charge much more than your average 1 to 3 times per week house cleaning jobs of inhabited homes. Plus, I rarely ever have to see anyone other than my team while on the job. Over the years, I have really been in some insane situations with these houses. Everything from encountering wild animals to once a deranged squatter taking up residence in the homes I clean. There is one house that stands out from the rest, however. One that haunts my dreams to this day. I got the job offer through a real estate agent I made my friend over the years in this business. It's a small home, not much clutter left. Amela, my real estate friend, said over the phone, "Should need more than 1 or 2 of you to complete the clean," she continued in her enthusiastic voice. I rolled my eyes. I hated when she used her customer service voice on me. Yeah, what's the real deal with this house?" I answered in my usual half-annoyed tone. Amelia responded more normal this time, honestly. "Lori, this house gives me the creeps. The granddaughter inherited it a couple of years ago, but has just recently decided to sell. The grandmother apparently died in the house." Yeah. I rolled my eyes again. Death in the houses I cleaned was nothing new to me, and Amelia was well aware of this. Amelia continued, "I cut my pre-visit to the house short last week. Didn't even make it upstairs where the grandmother apparently passed. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming in this one. So that got my attention. Amelia had been in real estate longer than I had been in the cleaning business, and she took her pre-get-to-know before showing visits very seriously. Anyway, recommended your cleaning services to the granddaughter, and she agreed right away. Do you accept? She finished. Yes, I accept the job. How soon can we get in to clean? I answered, feeling somewhat excited. Tomorrow, at 8:00. As I mentioned, the granddaughter removed most of the clutter from the house. But it still needs a good TLC cleaning. The key will be left under the welcome mat, Amelia said, back in her customer service voice. My eyes rolled yet again as I ended the call. Finally, an interesting clean, I thought, as I then dialed Morgan. The next day, my most trusted cleaner and best friend, Morgan, and myself drove up the horribly overgrown driveway and saw the well-aged small house come into view. Surely, they will need to hire an outside maintenance and renovation crew, I thought as I climbed out of my cleaning van. Morgan whistled as we stepped on the small creaking porch. You sure just you and I can handle this, Lori? Morgan asked as I fetched the house key from the weathered porch mat. If the outside is anything like the inside, we need the whole damn team, Morgan stated as she stood behind me. Amelia is over the top, but would never underestimate a cleaning job, I answered as I slid the house key into the old lock and turned until I heard the lock give way. I then pushed the door open as it made the usual ominous creak. We were both silent as we stepped into what I assumed was the small living room. The musty smell of a far too long closed-up house filled my nose as my eyes scanned the darkened room. Just as Amelia said, not much was left in the room. A couch took up most of the room on the right. A small wooden coffee table sat directly in front of it, coated in a thick layer of dust. I noticed a few photographs still clung to the walls. Let's get the supplies from the back of the van and get started, I said over my shoulder to Morgan. I have dinner plans and want this done long before. A bit later, I was scrubbing the dirty windows of the living room while Morgan opted to start upstairs. I heard Morgan call from up the stairs located just behind me. What? I called back. It was silent for several minutes as I waited for a response. I felt my aggravation growing as Morgan did not respond. I threw my rag on the floor and wiped my sweating brow as I turned and headed towards the stairs. Each step groaned beneath my feet as I climbed to the upper floor. You better have a damn good reason for interrupting me and not answering, I yelled as I reached the final step. Goosebumps covered my skin when I stepped onto the old wooden floor of the upper level. Weird, I mumbled to myself as I looked around. The upper level was a small hallway. 2 rooms were located on each side. As I peered down the dark corridor, Morgan, I called in a softer voice this time. No answer. I slowly headed down the hallway, wishing I had thought to bring my flashlight. I always hated working with no electricity, but it came with the job. I could see the light of day from the open door on left side of the hall. The other door on the right was closed. As I looked into the open door on the left, I saw Morgan standing still looking at the bed, located on the far side of the room. It moved, Morgan said in an almost whisper. "Ha," I answered as I walked in and stood beside her. The bed, it moved on its own while I was cleaning the floor. Morgan sat still, staring down at the bed. I then noticed the bed was crooked now. The bottom was several inches away from the wall, where the top was still flush with the corner of wall. "Do you see it?" Morgan then said it, even softer now. I almost couldn't hear her. Instead of questioning her, I looked down towards the bed that her eyes were glued to. I instantly saw what she was talking about. There was an imprint on the bed, the shape of a body, as if someone was laying on the bed that very moment. The chills were really covering my body now, and I felt myself actually shivering. It felt like someone was staring up at us directly from the bed. I slowly reached for Morgan's arm and gently pulled her towards me. "Let's go back downstairs. We will finish the bottom floor together," I said, matching her whispering tone. Morgan didn't respond, but obeyed my request. The feeling of eyes on us did not leave as we headed down the small hallway to the top of the stairs. I had to fight the urge to run down the flimsy steps. Once we were safely down in the living room, the air somehow felt easier to breathe, if that makes any sense. "What the hell was that?" Morgan demanded, finally sounding more like herself. I ignored that question. "Look, you know I hate skimming on jobs, but let's get this level done and get the hell out of here." I grabbed my cleaning supplies and headed to the next room, which was a small kitchen. Morgan stayed close beside me as we worked in silence, cleaning the sink, counter, We both froze after hearing what sounded like footsteps above us. "Don't," I said in a warning tone, as I went back to cleaning dust and mice droppings from the cabinet. Morgan again obeyed and stayed silent as she went back to work on the counter. The footsteps continued moving around above us on and off as we quickly finished in the kitchen. The last room branched off from the kitchen that appeared to be a small office. I was so relieved we would be out of there soon. This room had stained and worn down carpet covering the wooden floor. I turned on our rechargeable vacuum, and the loud buzzing sound almost deafened me, but I was glad for it. Working in eerie silence was not normal for us, as we usually chatted and listened to music, but I was too rushed to fool with conversation or a playlist right now. What the actual hell? I heard Morgan yell out over the sound of the vacuum. I jerked my head up to see Morgan staring up at the ceiling, looking terrified again. Just as I cut the vacuum off, I heard what she had to be referring to as the buzzing sound died down. I can only explain it as the choking or coughing, gurgling sound of an elderly person. It was only for a split second I heard it, but that was enough. "Screw this," I yelled, as I grabbed up as many of our supplies as I could. Morgan joined me in grabbing up the rest. We dashed out of the office through the kitchen and living room and out the front door. I was pretty much sprinting to the van while trying not to trip on the mess of the yard. Just as I got to the van, I heard Morgan shout, "Wait." I turned to see her a few feet behind me. I left my supplies upstairs. We also didn't finish cleaning up there. We didn't even clean the bathroom, which must be up there. I'm not charging the freaking client. We can buy new. Whatever supplies are left, get your ass in the van. I didn't wait for a response as I jumped into the driver's seat. Morgan hurried and threw the supplies in her arms in the back and slammed the door. I took one final look at the house as she slid into the passenger seat. I couldn't be sure, but it almost looked like someone was peering out of one of the two upper windows. I started the van. Hearing it roar to life was pure heaven in that moment. I floored it out of the driveway and back into town. I later called Amelia to explain the job was not complete, and I would not be charging. The granddaughter would have to find someone else to clean that nightmare. This has been a couple of months ago, and I was not kidding when I said this horrid house still haunts my dreams. It was last night I dreamt I was in a bed, staring up at an old, cracked, and familiar ceiling. I felt weak and frail as the weight of someone crawling on top of me took the air from my lungs. I felt cold hands around my throat squeezing tighter and tighter. That awful gurgling, choking sound coming from my mouth being the last thing I heard as I woke up in a cold sweat. The marks are still visible on my throat today. I bought a totally safe and perfectly normal abandoned lighthouse from the government, and I'm definitely not going to die in this place. I'm sure you've been hearing about how the US government is selling off parcels of land for incredibly cheap. You could get your very own lighthouse or abandoned Department of Wildlife building for a few $1,000s. They say it's so these buildings and sites can be maintained by private citizens rather than continue to spiral into disrepair. Recent experience has led me to the conclusion that the real reason is far more sinister. I knew it was going to need some work when I saw the pictures. Peeling paint, doors taken off their hinges. The thin spiral staircase leading to the top was missing a step, but with a starting bid of $1,000. On the off chance that it worked out, it was worth it. I threw out $1 over the minimum bid late at night, and then went to bed with zero expectations. None too fondly recalling the old eBay days, where someone would jump in, outbid you at the last minute. So I was genuinely shocked to wake up to an email that I'd actually won. It didn't take long for me to realize I was in way over my head. The excitement I'd felt over owning a place of my own dissolved the moment I saw the tall gray structure looming above me on the horizon. On the horizon. The picture on the website had shown the quintessential red and white striped lighthouse with turquoise waters and the deep blue sky as a backdrop. This building was a stark gray pitted stone tower sitting atop a windowless cement base. I checked the paperwork. This was the correct address. I tried the code on the lockbox. It worked. I emailed the contact information from the website, but I wasn't sure what else to do while I was waiting, other than check out the inside. As I walked a narrow and winding path to the door, I couldn't help but notice how the beach grass and flowers that dotted the rest of the landscape stopped abruptly at the beginning of the pathway. Seabirds, too, stayed far away. Walking in, I was overwhelmed by the amount of work I could tell that the place was going to need. It was even worse than the pictures had indicated. Paint had long peeled off, revealing large patches of discoloration on the walls and ceiling. Doors from the small rooms had been taken off their hinges and used to board up the entrance to the cement cylinder that served as the base. There was a sort of heaviness I felt the moment I stepped over the threshold. At the time, I chalked it up to buyer's remorse from seeing the level of disrepair it had fallen into. I've since come to believe that when a place is exposed to centuries of death, loneliness, and madness, it becomes as much part of it as the floors, or walls, or roof. The company replied. They seemed as confused as I was about the pictures, and apologized for the mix-up. It seemed like an innocent mistake. It probably should have deterred me, but I was still caught up in the high of owning my own land, picturing moving out of my apartment, not having a rent or mortgage. Well, I was right in a way. I certainly won't need to worry about rent again, or a mortgage, or anything else outside of this place. For that matter, I'd reached out to several contractors trying to line up repairs. Floors, Walls, doors, stairs. You name it. There was something wrong with it. Most had straight up turned me down when they heard where the job would be. Some politely but nervously declined. Others just hung up on me. It took me weeks to finally find someone, from 2 towns over, that was willing to come out and even take a look. He was a friendly guy that introduced himself as Joey, and offhandedly mentioned he was surprised to see the place with another new owner so soon. Before I could ask any follow-up questions to that, he was off measuring and jotting down notes, and then disappeared up the stairs. As the sun began to set, I realized it had been hours since I'd last seen him. I saw his pickup, still sitting outside, and called around for him. I walked up to the very top, careful to avoid the missing step, taking in the briny air while searching the perimeter. I checked each of the small rooms with their peeling paint and stained floors. I went to the bottom, and then reluctantly to the only place I hadn't looked yet, the cement cylinder at the base. I'd stuck my head down there the very first day after removing the barricades, and immediately decided it was a place I'd prefer to never visit again. It was made up of a series of narrow and dark concrete tunnels, stained with rust and filled with a dank, mildewy smell. Without windows or power, it was pitch black there even during the brightest of days. I opened the door and called out for him, but my own voice echoing back at me was the only response. Reluctantly, I descended, shining my flashlight around the interior of the tunnels and trying to convince myself that I definitely could find my way back and probably wouldn't be trapped down there forever. At the end of one of the passageways, I saw something that surprised me. A set of ancient-looking stairs that led downwards. I was confused, because the cylinder was at the very bottom. Anything below it would have been solid rock and eventually the ocean. I found my palms sweating so profusely at the thought of going down those stone steps that I nearly dropped my flashlight. I called his name weakly, but heard nothing. It was unnervingly quiet, a sort of thick silence that was heavy on the air. I hesitated. Part of me just longed to be in the lighted interior of my car, doors locked, on the way back to my crappy apartment. It would have been easy enough to get lost down there, and the thought of otherwise abandoning someone else to the darkness encouraged me to fight through my own fears and continue onward. I took a deep breath and cautiously took the first step. The tunnel's just a dark blur behind me. The stairs formed a spiral downwards, and as I descended, it felt as if the pitted walls began to close in around me as I continued down what seemed like an endless amount of stone steps. I knew I had to have been impossibly far down, at least 10 stories below the ground level. I still saw no sign of Joey. My voice had long since stopped echoing, as the space around me had narrowed. Every so often I'd come across graffiti, drawings, tally marks scribbled or scratched into the walls. At the top of the stairs, someone had started in the middle of a long and rambling letter to a loved one that wrapped along the ever-narrowing walls in cramped handwriting. The further I continued downwards, the content devolved into nonsense. Words were written on top of each other and strung together to form meaningless sentences, and then eventually stopped altogether. Different handwriting had picked up where it left off, and it simply said, "They are waiting." Others seemed to have underlined and circled the phrase in agreement as they too walked by. After I passed an "I'm not ready yet" that looked to have been written in blood, I decided that I was done reading graffiti and that I'd focus strictly on the stairs. The darkness, the narrowing walls, the slick steps. I paused at one point and wondered why I was still going. But besides the guilt if I gave up, I felt compelled to, eager almost, just as the space became so tight that the stone painfully scraped against my shoulders. The stairs sharply stopped at a small platform that opened into a tiny room. The first I'd seen since I'd been down here. The walls were covered with apologies, goodbyes, confessions, love letters, some written, some carved into the stone. Of those that were still legible, some were written in anguish, others with fear. Some were just pure madness, but not one of them expressed hope. Someone had written exit here in large, disjointed letters, with a crudely drawn arrow pointing downwards to a hatch on the floor. I hesitated for a moment, knowing there was nothing below us but rock and ocean, and I should have hit those hours ago, but decided I'd come all this way. I might as well keep going. It led to even more stairs, but this time the steps were that of a tight iron spiral staircase, one step missing. I felt a sudden stale breeze as I descended. There were windows around me that opened into the pitch-black night. It was so dark outside that I hadn't even realized they were windows at all at first. I froze, confused. I wasn't sure how I managed to get myself so utterly turned around. I knew I'd been walking downwards the entire way. I was certain of it. Yes, I was tired. It was dark, but I knew up from down. I heard a sound from below, a whirring, and thought I'd finally found Joey, or somehow, some sort of exit. Something, anything but more stairs. Relieved, I decided to continue downwards, upwards, the direction I'd been going. At the bottom was a ladder leading to another hatch on the floor. I climbed down, opened it, and, to my utter confusion, found myself standing at the top of the lighthouse. I grasped for the railing to orient and brace myself against the strong, stinging wind. I couldn't see the moon, stars, any light reflecting on the water around me. It was somehow darker outside than it had been in the tunnels and unlit stairwell, darker than I had previously thought possible. The choppy black waters of the sea were indistinguishable from the sky. The land, even with the steady flash of the strangely tinted automated light, the whirring I'd heard, I could see very little. At first, I felt a wave of relief at seeing Joey's car was gone. He'd made it out, but it was short-lived when I realized that mine was gone too. The shore, the beach houses in the distance, everything was gone. The wind had picked up. Instead of the light and briny sea air, it was heavy in my lungs and had a smell. Earthiness mixed with something else that I couldn't place at the time. Although I couldn't see much of anything beyond the railing when the light above flashed, I could just make out pale, nearly translucent forms being tossed along in the black water far in the distance. When I finally managed to look away from the hypnotizing motion of whatever was floating in the waves, I realized the slick floor was littered with items. Joey's shoes, notepad, and tool belt. A woman's purse, leather peeling from the constant barrage of the black water. Piles and piles of neatly folded clothes. I panicked, opened the hatch I'd come down, up, through. I was relieved to see steps leading down. I rushed back down the metal stairs, slipping from the dark water that had splashed against my shoes before making it back to the platform. I ran as fast as my tired legs would allow, past the hundreds of additional, there-waiting messages I had missed the first time. It wasn't until I reached the top of the stone steps that I paused for the first time, and I took deep, gulping breaths in relief, until I saw it. Exit here, the arrow pointing upwards. I told myself I must have missed that on the way down. I laughed even, chiding myself for my forgetfulness, as I reached for the opening to the hatch, eager to return to the dank interior of the cement cylinder. I never would have thought I'd be happy to see that pitch-black series of tunnels again. My laughter turned to misery. I think I sobbed that first time, when the fetid breeze hit my face, bringing with it that smell of old things, welcoming things. My phone said it was 6:45 a.m., but it never got any lighter outside. The pale things in the sea below moved along with the waves, their tangled limbs just a bit clearer in the closer proximity. I opened the hatch and climbed back down, but slowly that time, wobbly with exhaustion. When I descended and reached the platform and little room again, exit here pointing downwards at the hatch, I didn't even bother opening it for the longest time. Eventually, I knew I needed to, just in case. I needed to see. I started to lose track of how many times I made that fruitless journey that always ended the same way, with me stepping outside into the endless night. I didn't start my own tally marks right away, but it's been 40 trips since I started counting. By the 7th recorded time I had stepped out into the darkness, I was laughing. I needed to see the water. I had to breathe in that air. It was an urge that I could not fight. The pale forms in the dark waters moved with the current. Closer, further away. Closer, further, closer, closer, closer still. I've been trying to conserve my phone battery ever since I found I have a faint signal in the exact middle of the stairs. I've been so tempted to call for help, an overwhelming urge that is still hard to fight, even though I know I'd be dooming them as well. According to the date, I've been stuck here for a week with no food or water. At one point, I tripped and smashed my head on the stone steps, based on the sound and the blood, an injury that should have been fatal. Even death refuses to grant me reprieve. I've memorized "they are waiting" written along the walls, every word of each confession. I've even written a few messages of my own. One is on the wall with the others, short, streaky, and written in the only medium I could find, for whomever is unfortunate to follow in my footsteps. And this post, a warning to others that may also be tempted to accept a deal that seems too good to be true. Although much of it is illegible, I do think the graffiti was right about two things. That out into the stale air, into the embrace of the dark sea. That is truly the exit, the only way out. And, judging by the slap of wet footsteps on the hatch above my head, they are waiting for me. Do not go to abandoned places alone. My life is boring. I'm a student at a boring university in a boring town. In my free time, I usually sit in my tiny boring student room with my boring computer, having to listen to my boring roommate and her boring boyfriend's loud conversations. For a long while, I have felt that my life is too routine. I do the same boring shit every single day. I felt a need for more excitement in my life. Since I was 15, I've always been interested in places that most people do not really know of. Places that have stood abandoned for many years. Places that, if you enter them, you stand the risk of getting arrested. Reading about these places on Reddit always excited me. I wanted to go to them. I wanted the adrenaline and fear that came with them. Watching other people on YouTube exploring old hotels, warehouses, malls, or even bowling alleys made me jealous. I watched people getting chased by dogs or cops, people finding creepy items or encountering homeless addicts, and that only made me want to visit an abandoned place more. Because my life was so boring, the adrenaline was very alluring to me, and so I did some research. I had only been a student at my university for a couple of months. I was in a new town with new places to explore. After doing some Googling, I found out that there, in fact, was an abandoned place where I live, not too far from me. Of course, I was intrigued. I needed to spice up my life. And unlike other people my age, I did not want to do that by partying or hooking up. I wanted to spice my life up by adding some danger to it. From what I read, the place did not seem that special. It was not an entire hotel or some mall. It was only an old underground tunnel that used to be a passage for car traffic. It felt like the perfect place for a beginner to explore. It had not been in use for over 20 years, and it seemed that not that many urban explorers had been there before me. I have some friends, but none of them would ever be interested in putting themselves in danger just to seek some thrill. Understandable, but boring. My friends are the kind of people who like to sit in a circle while drinking and playing games. That can be fun, of course, but it is not very exciting. So, I went alone. Stupid decision. I know. I am a young and short female who decided to go to an abandoned place after dark on my own. I was naive and thought that nothing could ever happen to me. But something did. And after my experience, you best believe that I will not explore alone, or at all, ever again. It was a Saturday night when I decided to take my bike and go to the tunnel. With me, I brought a flashlight, an army knife, pepper spray, and my camera. At least I brought some protection, right? But that did not help me from getting traumatized, maybe for life. It had already gotten dark out, and before leaving I checked the time on my computer monitor. It was 22:04, so not that late. This was during autumn though, so the natural light had run out for the day. I left my room and locked the door after me. My roommate is a nice girl, but I don't fully trust her yet, hence locking it. When I left, she had the door to her room open, as always, and therefore saw me leaving. I did not tell her where I was going, only that I was taking a walk. Once I got out of my apartment building, I unlocked my bike and started my journey towards the tunnel. I had found the coordinates online and was finding my way to them with the help of Google Maps on my phone. To get there, I had to bike through a wooded area. The path was not lit up. The only reason that I could see anything was because of my bike light. It was scary, but I enjoyed the fear. At least I was feeling something. I thought it was great. I already felt more alive, and I had not even reached my destination yet. Suddenly, my GPS said to turn left into the woods. It would have been impossible to take my bike because there was no path, and the terrain did not seem friendly. Therefore, I left my bike on the path. I turned my bike light off, and suddenly, I was standing in complete darkness. The only sound was the wind blowing the leaves and some ruffling of trees from a deer or something. I took a deep breath and turned on the flashlight that I had brought with me. It was a cheap flashlight, and the light it emitted was far from satisfactory. I could really only see a couple of meters in front of me. Nothing scary had really happened yet, but I still felt uneasy. I started to regret coming there, but thought that I might as well get to the tunnel. Quickly, I started to make my way through the forest. I felt scared and sort of observed. In reality, I knew that no one was out there. It was 10:30 at night in the middle of the forest on a Saturday. No one was crazy enough to take a stroll at this time. Except for me, I guess. Eventually, I reached the tunnel. If I wasn't scared before, I definitely was now. The inside of the tunnel was dark and seemed to go on forever. The outside was covered with demonic symbols. And of course, phallic objects spray-painted on the wall. Above the tunnel, someone had written "Stay out" or "Die" in red paint. None of this made me want to leave, though. I just figured that some bored teenagers from the town had painted it all. To be fair, there was not a lot to do around here. With that, I entered the tunnel. The ground in there was slightly moist, and I could hear dripping sounds around me. Stupidly enough, I was wearing sneakers, and the dirty liquid from the ground made them soaked right away. I still kept going. I would just clean the shoes later. The graffiti from outside the tunnel continued on the tunnel walls, with more cryptic symbols and warnings. I kept going, knowing that this was something that was common in abandoned places. The tunnel was not that interesting, to be honest. Sure, it was thrilling being there at night, but there were not a lot of things to discover. A pit started to form in my stomach. I did not really know why. Nothing had happened to make me scared, but something just did not feel right. I shined my light on one of the tunnel walls, and immediately jumped back, and I am embarrassed to say, let out a high-pitched scream, which echoed through the tunnel. I thought I had seen a ghost or something, but after looking at the wall, I could see that it was just a demonic-looking face painted on there. I chuckled a little to myself. How could something so stupid have scared me like that? I must have really been on edge. My momentary relief was quickly gone when I shined my flashlight on the ground in front of the face. There, on the ground, I could see some dirty blankets and a pillow. At the time, I couldn't understand why it was there, but it definitely freaked me out a bit. Was someone living in this tunnel? I started to feel very uneasy again and wanted to leave. I took a photo of the face in the bed, just to document that I had been there, and started to walk towards the exit. That is when I heard footsteps coming into the tunnel. That was scary enough. But what made it worse was that they came from the direction I had come from. The direction which was my way out. I froze for a second, not knowing what to do. Eventually, before the person could get any closer, I snapped out of my haze and started running the other way, further into the tunnel. This seemed like my best option at the time, and knowing what I know now, I can confirm that it was. When I started running, so did the other person. I could hear the footsteps speeding up behind me. While running, I started to take my army knife out of my pocket. I know that running with a knife in itself is dangerous, but at least I could protect myself if the person caught up to me. The tunnel was not as long as I thought, and eventually, I reached its other end. In my panic state, I had not noticed that the footsteps behind me had prevailed, but once I had left the tunnel, I noticed it. Still, I kept running. At that moment, I thought that I had to get back to my bike, so I started going through the forest, running beside the hill which the tunnel went through. During my run, at various moments, I could swear that I heard branches breaking around me. It might have been paranoia though, because it would not have been possible for the person to catch up to me at this point. When I found the path where my bike stood again, I felt a small sense of relief. Once I reached the bike, I quickly unlocked it and raced home. Not until I reached my apartment building did I start to calm down slightly. That is when I noticed a note in my bicycle basket. I put my bike away and ran into my dorm room with the note in hand. Once I had locked the door behind me, I sat down. I was still in a state of shock at this point. Had someone really just chased me? Why did I put myself in such danger? Slowly I opened up the note. The contents of it was short, but terrifying. Hello, pretty girl. I've not met you yet, but I am excited to do so. The fact that this was left in my bicycle basket means that this person must have been somewhere in the forest, observing me while I left my bike. If not, how did they know that I was a girl? The note was not exactly threatening, but with context, it was definitely jarring. This person had been by themselves, in the forest at night, observing me, and then following me. Thank God I noticed their footsteps in time. Otherwise, I might not have been writing this right now. I still don't know who chased me that night, and I will not be going back to find out. I assume that the person who chased me is the same person who lives in the tunnel. Just think about what kind of state you must be in to find shelter in such a place. Either this person was on drugs, or in a very bad mental state. Probably both. After this experience, I am definitely not going anywhere by myself at night. And to the person who might be reading this, do not go to abandoned places alone. No matter how thrilling or enticing it might seem, it is not worth the risks.